Nobody's ever called me a thinking machine before, so I'm going to take that compliment and hold on to it for a while. So I was never very good in school. In high school, my GPA was a whopping 2.79. I went to community college shortly after that, improved slightly, got a 2.8. And then finally, I went to the University of California, Santa Cruz, where I spent the last 2 years to get a bachelor's degree. Now, in UC Santa Cruz, I actually focused, I buckled down, and I did well. I graduated with a 3.8 with honors in economics and psychology, and I was really, really excited to join the corporate world, to join the business world, get my first job. And shortly after I graduated, I actually went to go work for a company in Los Angeles. And when I went to go interview for this company, they said, you're going to be doing all sorts of amazing things here. You're going to be interviewing executives, you're going to be doing business travel, you're going to be doing all sorts of really fun things. And I thought, well, this is awesome. This is exactly what I've been working so hard for in college. Sure enough, a couple months into the job, I'm doing data entry, I'm doing PowerPoint presentations, I'm doing cold calling. And then one day, an executive comes out of his office, and he hands me a $10 bill, and he says, I have a really important job for you. I have a big meeting coming up. Take this $10, go run down to Starbucks, and get me and this guy a cup of coffee. And by the way, get yourself a latte as well. And that really had me thinking, this is why I was spending so much time and so much effort, is to go get somebody else coffee. And ever since that happened, I've been very fascinated with the future of work and how the workplace is changing and what our ideas and expectations about work are going to look like. And that is where I spend most of my time today. Now, I share a lot of what I learned from various organizations in a couple different formats, and I invite you to connect with me in one of these places to get more access to this stuff. I share a lot of the thoughts that I learn on the future of work in books, in podcasts, in articles, in interviews that I do, in YouTube shows. So if you're interested in that stuff, let me know, send me an email, connect with me on Twitter, and you can check out thefutureorganization.com to get access to all that stuff. A lot of also what I do is I run a community called the Future of Work Community. And this is a collection of some of the world's most forward-thinking brands from around the world that come together to explore various themes around the future of work. This includes collaboration, this includes millennials, this includes the freelancer economy, all sorts of things. It also includes innovation. And I host 2 events for all these organizations, and we have a digital community where we all come together to explore these themes. And what I want to share with you today around innovation actually comes from a lot of these organizations that have shared their ideas with me. Now, I first want to start with a question. How is it that an organization like Toyota is consistently able to deliver superior products and superior automobiles year after year after year? How is a company like Starbucks consistently able to delight the customer? And how can a company like P&G, create new billion-dollar brands? Now, the answer to this is ideas. Now, ideas are, we all have many ideas every day, hundreds, if not thousands of ideas. And when we create and do something with those ideas, I think they can fall into 2 different types of categories: inventions and innovations. But it's important for us to distinguish the difference between invention and innovation. There's a lot of debate, there's constant articles written about this topic, and I think it's a very fascinating discussion. So to help us understand the difference between innovation and where I want to go with all of this, I want to show you a series of images. On the left, we have chopsticks with a fan attached to them, Google Glass, and some weird, I'm not even going to attempt to guess what that is, toilet paper headband thing. On the right, we have things like the GoPro, iPhone, and Post-it notes. So what separates these things? What is the difference between Google Glass and the GoPro camera, between the chopsticks with the fan on them and the Post-it notes, and between the tissue paper headband, I don't even know what to call that thing, and the iPhone? What is the difference between those things? And when we think about innovation and invention, I think the best way to think about and distinguish the 2 is that invention plus innovation, invention plus impact is what equals innovation. In other words, ideas that then have a broad impact is what makes innovation. So you come up with an idea for a product or service, you develop it. Once that gets market penetration, impact, touches a lot of people, I think that's when something truly becomes an innovation. Now, if we were to look at how innovation was done previously over the past couple of decades, it would look something like this. You have your organization, your ivory tower, so to speak. In this large building, you have some floor. Either it's the top floor or it's the basement. In that floor, you get off the elevator, you walk down some hall, you're greeted by a door that oftentimes says authorized personnel only. And then once you walk inside, that is where the select group of people that do innovation come together. It's a few people that come together to make these choices on behalf of the entire organization. And this is how innovation used to get done for many, many decades. This was the standard approach for innovation. R&D teams, everything was locked away behind closed doors. Everything was very secretive. But we're starting to see that that is no longer acceptable. And the reason for that is because organizations, many of them, are starting to get in a little bit of trouble. This first chart shows the average company lifespan on the S&P 500 index. And we can see that the lifespan of the average organization on the S&P 500 is drastically shrinking. The second chart shows that since 1955, 89% of organizations on the Fortune 500 have either gone bankrupt, merged, or they might still exist, but they have fallen off the list. And so what that means is that organizations really have to start thinking differently about what it means to innovate, about what it means to create new products, about what it means to create new services. Now, part of the reason for this is because the pace of change is growing exponentially. 1,000 years ago, a mathematician by the name of Sissa invented the game of chess. And he showed it to the ruler at the time, and the ruler was very impressed, and he said, "Oh my goodness, this is great. You can have any reward you want." And Sissa thought about it for a minute, and he said, "Okay, here's what I want you to do. I don't want land, I don't want horses or camels, I don't want a palace, I just want rice." And the ruler thought about that for a minute, and he said, "Okay, that's fine." But Sissa said, "Here's what I want you to do. I want you to take 1 grain of rice and put it on the first square of the chessboard. I want you to put 2 grains of rice on the second square, 4 grains on the third square, and keep doubling it until you get to the end." Now, at first glance, this doesn't seem like much. From 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16, 32, 64. The numbers aren't that large, especially when you think of grains of rice. But what happens when you get to the second half of the chessboard is the growth starts to become exponential. And after the ruler sent away his servants to calculate how much rice this is going to be, they came back and the ruler's jaw dropped. It turns out there isn't even this much rice that is produced in the entire world today. It would be more than a Mount Everest made out of rice. Now, the legend goes then that Sissa then became the king. And there's an alternate version that says he was also beheaded because the ruler got very mad and didn't like that. We'll go with a positive spin. Now, in addition to this is a metaphor for the technological change that we're seeing. Technology is increasing at an extremely rapid pace, but it's not just technology. It's also our behavior, our attitudes, our values, the way that we're thinking about work. And the big challenge for organizations here is that the workplace is adapting very quickly. The workplace is changing at an exponential growth rate. But our organizations tend to move very linearly. And as that gap grows between how fast our organizations can move and how fast the world of work is changing, the more disengaged our employees start to become. And what organizations are trying to figure out is, how do we close that gap? How do we make our organizations keep pace with the changes that we are seeing in the world of work? Now, the reason this is happening is 5 macro trends that are shaping the future of work. And I'll go through these quickly, and then we'll jump into exploring how innovation is changing. Now, the first 5 trends the first trend is new behaviors. Now, if I were to find any of you randomly on the street and say, "You know what, one day I'm going to know everything about you. I'm going to know the movies that you like, the people that you're connected to, your entire professional history, everything. You probably think I'm nuts. But look at the world that we live in. We share our personal information on Twitter. Our entire professional history is up on LinkedIn. We tell people where we're going on Foursquare. We put up pictures on Instagram. We're very comfortable living a public life. And this has also changed the way that we teach, the way that we educate, the way that we consume information, the way that we purchase products. Everything, all of these new behaviors are entering our organizations. And that's something that companies really have to think about. That's trend number one. The second trend is around new technologies. Collaboration platforms, big data, the Internet of Things, wearable devices like this one that I have on my wrist here. Cloud computing. All these new technologies are not only enabling organizations to work in new ways, but they're forcing them to think about how to work in new ways. The third trend that we're seeing is around the millennial workforce. How many people here are millennials besides me? One? Two? OK, there we go. Yeah, there we go. All right, that's much better. My people. So the millennial workforce is causing a lot of, for lack of a better word, havoc. Every business publication that you look at nowadays is making it sound like millennials are these weird aliens coming from another planet that are just going to like suck out everyone else's brains and then just destroy everything. It's really not that bad. Now, what's really fascinating about this workforce is that it's really forcing organizations to change, because these are a group of people that are digital natives. They do have certain different values and expectations. But I always tell organizations, even if you were to get rid of every millennial that you have in your company, you would still have a lot of people that care about flexible work, doing meaningful work, having a good relationship with their coworkers and their boss, that care about community involvement and sustainability. So although millennials are going to be the majority of the workforce, this isn't just about millennials. The future employee is anybody that has that different mindset and value and set of expectations, regardless if they're 22 or 62. The fourth trend that we're seeing is around mobility. And this is the idea of being able to connect to the internet to get your job done. I think the theme for the future of work is connect to work. In other words, you should be able to get your job done anywhere, anytime, and on any device. Mobility is a massive trend that organizations are starting to think about, especially when we think of workplace flexibility. The fifth and final trend that I want to look at is globalization. Globalization is essentially this idea of operating in a world where boundaries of any kind do not exist. The language that you speak, the currency that you transact in, where you're located, the culture that you subscribe to, all of these things are starting to matter less and less and less. In fact, the world itself is just becoming like one big city. And what that means is that boundaries to doing business are falling. Now, when we look at these 5 trends together, what it means for organizations is that they have to accept and realize that the smartest people, the best ideas, aren't always within your organization. As much as we all like to think that we have the best people, we have to recognize that there are other great people out there in the world that aren't inside of our organizations. There are other fantastic ideas that other people have that don't work for us. And so we have to think differently about what it means to innovate. Innovation cannot just come from a few people locked away on a floor in some random part of the building, in secrecy, isolated, and separated from everything else. So what does that actually look like? Now, as a caveat, I want to say that all the organizations that I've spoken to, and when I show you what this innovation ecosystem looks like, there are 3 things to keep in mind that all these organizations have done. The first is they have a corporate culture that supports innovation, meaning that all of these organizations that I'm going to show you enable their employees to experiment, to test ideas, to get access to some kind of experimental capital, and to play around with and experiment with things. If you don't have that type of a corporate culture, then this type of innovation is going to be very, very hard. The second thing that all these organizations have is the proper technology in place to connect people to make sure that these ideas can spread. If you want to have innovation at scale across an organization and beyond, you cannot do that without having the right technologies in place. And the third thing that all these organizations have is a process to manage innovation. In other words, what do you do with the ideas when you get them? Do they sit there? Who manages it? How do you turn them into something? So this is the caveat, the 3 things that are required in order to make this type of an innovation ecosystem work. So what is this innovation ecosystem actually look like? When we think about the future of work, I think there are 5 types of innovation. Some people would refer to this as open innovation. I like to call it the innovation ecosystem. And there are 5 ways that organizations are innovating. The first, in the middle, is with employee innovation. Up top, we have customer innovation. On the right, partner and supplier innovation. At the bottom, competitor innovation. And on the left, we have public innovation. That is innovation from anyone, anywhere around the world. So let's start off with the first one, which is employee innovation. And I actually think what Bolin talked about in regards to PGI and how they think about product innovation and bringing in customers actually speaks volumes to exactly the type of innovation that I'm talking about. So what does employee innovation actually mean? Employee innovation means that any employee within your organization, regardless of where they are, their seniority level, has the ability to contribute to the organization. They have the ability to contribute ideas, they have the ability to test ideas out, and they have the opportunity to have their ideas heard. Now again, keep in mind, none of this is possible without the 3 things that I mentioned earlier. So what are examples of organizations that do an excellent job with employee innovation? The first is Whirlpool. Now, when people think of innovative companies, they really don't think of manufacturing and appliance makers. Yet Whirlpool is consistently one of the most innovative companies in the world. But what's fascinating about Whirlpool is they're doing broader changes around the future of work, besides just thinking differently about innovation. But before Whirlpool did this, their sales volume every year was declining by 2%. And then they decided to make a change. Their goal was to make innovation a part of the core competency of the organization. Innovation was supposed to be everyone's job. Every single employee was responsible for innovation. So what did they do? They deployed a couple different things. The first, they created an internal platform where any employee can come forward with ideas and with what they like to call discoveries. Employees can also be taken through something called an idea lab session, where they share learnings from something and see how it can be developed into some kind of a product. And this is any employee within Whirlpool. This is a company that has over 70,000 employees around the world. Now, Whirlpool is also doing some broader changes. They've recently abandoned IBM and switched over to Google for their technology stack. They abolished all managerial roles within the organization and gave everybody leadership categories. They've invested tens of millions of dollars into designing new workspaces. So they're investing a lot into tapping into the collective intelligence of their employees. Now, since they've done this, they've noticed that their sales volume has increased by 2% in aggregate. So that's quite a big shift. The second organization is Toyota. Toyota is consistently delivering better quality automobiles than all of their competitors. How are they doing this? Since 1951, they've had a program in place called the Toyota Creative Ideas and Suggestive System. Since 1951. To date, they've had over 40 million ideas suggested by employees. 40 million ideas. This is an organization that employs hundreds of thousands of people. Now, at one point, Toyota had over a 90% implementation rate for these ideas. Now, this was years ago, but can you imagine a 90% implementation rate for so many ideas? And these are ideas around how to make the cars better, how to improve them, how to design them better. Anything that you can possibly think of, employees would come forward. And in 1951, this started as a suggestion box. There was literally a box. People would write down suggestions on a note card, drop it in the box. Hopefully they're not still doing that, but it gives you an idea of what an organization like Toyota is doing and how they're consistently staying on top of their game. One of the other fascinating things about Toyota, and some of you may have heard of this, they have something called an Andon Cord. Basically what that means is that any employee on the manufacturing floor can pull a cord that stops the entire assembly line for the entire facility. And any employee that sees a defect or a problem or an issue pulls that cord and has the power to make the change required on that fix that they see. They stopped the entire manufacturing facility. Now, since then, they've upgraded. They no longer have a cord that hangs from the ceiling. They have a button that you push. But still, the power that you can give to a manufacturing level employee to stop an entire assembly line to fix something, I think, is extremely valuable. Now, what's really great about employee innovation, I think it's a fantastic starting point for most organizations. It's a great starting point because it's inside of your organization, so you can control and contain things if things get a little out of hand. And it's also a place where you can start to experiment with ideas that are close to the company core. In other words, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree when we look at ideas that come from employees. The second type of innovation is customer innovation. And I know that's especially relevant here. When we think of customer innovation, there are two examples that immediately come to mind. The first, some of you may have heard of, which is from Starbucks. Has anybody here heard of the My Starbucks idea? A couple people? So you can actually Google My Starbucks idea, and you will see this now. Hundreds of thousands of Starbucks customers from around the world go onto this site and make suggestions for drinks, for ambiance, for getting involved with the community, for programs, anything that you can think of. In fact, the free Wi-Fi idea, the getting a free coffee on your birthday, that all came from something called My Starbucks idea. Now, what's fascinating about this is that not only does Starbucks collect these ideas and categorize them, but they are completely transparent with their customers in terms of which ideas they're working on, which ones have been implemented, which ones have they tried but didn't work. They share all of this information with the public so that you know their ideas are going into something. And they tell you if something doesn't work out, which is extremely, extremely important. Having that feedback mechanism to go back to the customers. So check out My Starbucks idea. It'll be a really, really fascinating thing for you guys to see. The second thing, or the second company, is Fedex. Now, most people think of Fedex as an organization that is in shipping, in transportation. They might deliver your mail. But FedEx also delivers a lot of valuable cargo. I'm talking about body parts, organs, living tissue, heart, lungs. And the big challenge for FedEx was, how do we make sure that these products that we're delivering, this living tissue, these hearts, these brains, these lungs that we're transporting across the country and across the world, stay in good shape? As you can imagine, if you're getting a lung, you want to make sure it's a good lung. So they worked with their customers. Now, in this case, their customers were doctors, nurses, medical suppliers, people in the entire pharma and medical community. So their customer base was very, very different. And they worked with them to create something called Sense Aware. And basically what it is, it's a device that allows you to know the barometric pressure, the temperature, the light sensitivity, the humidity, everything that's going on inside of the box that is being shipped. So you know, while something is being shipped, what the condition is like inside of that box. Now, this originally started as something to transport living tissue and has since expanded into a massive line of business for FedEx that now includes transporting jewelry, precious stones, aerospace equipment, and all sorts of other things. Now, what's really great about customer innovation is that it allows you to actually deliver what your customers want. There's no guessing that's involved. But in order to make customer innovation successful, organizations have to think about a larger scale process, which is why I think it's important to start with the employee innovation piece and then branch out to the customer innovation piece, because that allows you to set up your framework, your processes, and the things that are required. Organizations also have to get over this idea of trust and transparency. How much information are we willing to give to our customers? The answer is as much as you possibly can. Tell them what you're working on, tell them what you're thinking, tell them what isn't working. So having that level of transparency and trust is extremely important in order for customer innovation to work. Now, the third type of innovation is innovating with partners and with suppliers. These are people that help make your products successful. They don't transact with you like customers do, but they either build your products, they build your services, they help distribute them for you. They are your partners, they are your suppliers. And there are a couple of really great examples. The first one is L'Oreal, the cosmetic manufacturer, the cosmetic company. Now, the way that they think about partner and supplier innovation is a little bit more traditional, because they get everybody together in a room. And they share information with their partners and with their suppliers. They bring in executives from L'Oreal, and they share information with them that you would not expect them to share. Sales information, inventory information, customer demands. They share all sorts of confidential stuff with them. Now, L'Oreal is unfortunately very secretive as far as what has come of this, but all they've said is 4 significant products have come from their ability to innovate with their partners and suppliers. What I think is perhaps even a more compelling and interesting example is Walmart. Now, in the 1980s, Walmart's annual revenue was around $24 billion. At Kmart, their annual revenue was around $29 billion. And Sears, their other large competitor, was around $31 billion. And in the 1980s, Walmart decided to do something radical. They said, you know what? Why don't we open up all of our information to our suppliers? Give them our inventory data, give them our sales data, and let's see if that is going to make any type of improvements. Now, that was a radical idea at the time. People thought they were nuts. But now look at where Walmart is today versus their competitors. They employ 2.2 million people. Their annual revenue is over $475 billion. Kmart's annual revenue is around $16 billion. And most people think that Sears is going bankrupt. So that shows you the power of opening up that data and information and innovating with your partners and with your suppliers. They started sharing inventory data, sales data, store data, everything that you could think of. In fact, recently Walmart introduced a program called Get on the Shelf. And it allows Walmart to work with their smaller partners and suppliers where they can suggest products that they want Walmart to carry. Customers then vote on the products that they want to see in Walmart stores, and then Walmart stocks the shelves with those products. So it blends a little bit of the partner and the supplier and the customer innovation piece together. What's really great about innovating with partners and suppliers, it oftentimes improves efficiencies. And the earlier that you can bring partners and suppliers into the innovation process, the better it is. But again, it also requires a very, very high degree and level of trust. The 4th type of innovation, which many people find extremely interesting, is innovating with your competitors. How do you bring in your competitors into the process to create products and services with you? Now, the examples that I want to show you are probably some of the most fiercely competitive, cutthroat companies that are out there today. The first is with Lockheed Martin and Boeing. Now, with Lockheed Martin and Boeing, we still have to wait and see how this is going to play out. Hopefully, we'll find out by the end of the year. But basically, what happened here is that the US Air Force announced a multi-billion-dollar bid for a new bomber program, a new Air Force, new airplane program. And there were a couple companies that were competing: Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and I think maybe one other. And so Boeing and Lockheed Martin got into an agreement to team up and to go against Northrop Grumman together, to combine their resources, to combine their skills, to combine their years of experience and expertise, and try to win this bid against Northrop Grumman. Because their rationale and their reasoning was, we have a better chance to do this together than doing it separately. Now again, I threw that example in there because it's an interesting one, but we're going to see what happens by the end of this year if they win the bid or not. The second example of competitor innovation comes from Ford and GM. Again, some of the most cutthroat, hardcore companies that are fighting each other out there. Now, Ford and GM, obviously 2 giants, 2 behemoths in the automotive space, they decided to come together to develop 9 and 10-speed transmissions together that are going to be coming out in cars next year. Their rationale, again, was they were both trying to do the same thing. They were both competing against each other. And they said, look, if we do this together, we can improve the quality of the product, we can improve efficiency of the product, and we can get it out faster. So they decided to team up to create these 9 and 10-speed transmissions that we are going to see in cars next year on both Ford and on both GM. Now, this is oftentimes the most challenging type of innovation because you have to innovate and bring in your competitors into the process. A lot of the companies that I spoke to here said the biggest challenge is complex legal requirements and issues. But if you can make it work, you can do amazing things with your competitors. Now, the 5th and final type of innovation is innovation with the public. This is anybody. It doesn't have to be a customer. It could be a partner. It could be a supplier. Anybody that just comes across your site. The two examples that I want to show here are Shell and P&G. Shell had a program called Game Changer, which was originally only available to their employees. They've since released it and made it available to anybody. In fact, if you Google Shell Game Changer, you will see it. And it allows anybody, anywhere in the world, to come forward and contribute an idea. Any idea you want, you can come forward and contribute to. Today, they say that 20% of their R&D for all of Shell comes from seed ideas that come from their Game Changer program. The second example I'll share with you is P&G. They have something called Connect and Develop, which some of you may have heard of. Very famous example. They've been doing this for many years. Connect and Develop is a place where P&G puts up needs that they have. We want to figure out a way to reduce sodium. We want to figure out a way to make our products clean even more. They put out whatever needs they have, whatever they're thinking about. And anybody, anywhere in the world, can contribute those ideas. Febreze, everybody heard of Febreze? Now it's a $1 billion brand. That came from Connect and Develop. The Mr. Clean Magic Eraser, that came from Connect and Develop. Their goal is that by the end of this year, they want this to be a multi-billion-dollar revenue stream, ideas that come from Connect and Develop. In fact, 60% of their R&D comes from Connect and Develop. Oh, I'm sorry, 60%, they saw 60% growth in their R&D as a result of Connect and Develop. So these are massive, massive impacts that we are starting to see on innovation for organizations that are able to open up. Now, what we have to remember with public innovation is that these are where the most out-of-the-box ideas come from, because they come from anywhere, they come from any time, and they can be about anything. So in order for organizations to effectively tackle and be able to innovate with the public, this is where they have to have the most robust set of processes, technologies, and frameworks in place. And if you have that in place, you can do amazing, amazing, and tremendous things like we can see with P&G and with Shell. So this is what the innovation ecosystem looks like. And I think this is the direction that most organizations are going. Now, all the companies that I talked to today are in some way doing one, maybe two of these things. As we go forward, it's going to be important to do all 5 of these things. All 5 of these things are crucial. Now, when I interviewed these organizations and I asked them, I said, what do you do? Like, how do you even start to think about this? And they all told me the same thing. There's no formula for it. There's no template that we can give you. But the #1 way that you can start building these innovation ecosystems is to start to think about your company like a lab and less like a factory. Factories are oftentimes stagnant. They're linear. You don't get feedback. They're process-driven. They're command and control. They're top-down. Factories, on the other hand, enable experimentation, enable testing. They look at data. They look at feedback. And so this has been the #1 piece of feedback that these organizations have given me. Think about your company like a lab. Don't think about it like a factory. And I'll leave you with these 3 questions to ask you. What can you do to encourage that lab mentality in your organization? Do you have the technologies in place to support and enable that kind of innovation? And finally, do you have the processes in place to take ideas and turn them into something greater? Imagine what your organization would look like if it was able to do these things. Thank you. And I'm told we have a few minutes for Q&A. So we have around 5, maybe 10 minutes for Q&A. So if anybody has any questions about any of this, I'm happy to answer them. Yes?
Hello. When people are submitting ideas, do the companies ever feel they need to give this person a reward for the idea or worry about them taking it to another competitor? Do you know what I mean? Because
yes.
It's your IP. Do you need a reward for it?
Great question.
How do they sustain that?
I think probably the best example that we can see with this is Starbucks. And this is a public example. You can actually go on your computer and look at my Starbucks idea. What they do there is they vote on ideas. So customers come up with these ideas that they want Starbucks to implement, and the community as a whole votes on them. The ideas that get the most votes are the ones that get implemented. Now, as far as I know, they don't give specific rewards to the people that contribute those ideas, but I think they do have a gamification component in place where you are seen as the most valuable contributor there. They might do some kind of rewards there around drinks and things as far as being able to go into Starbucks stores. I'm not 100% sure. But as far as I know, last I remember, it was just getting on that leaderboard. It was that gamification component, being seen as the true Starbucks fan. Like, I am the one that came up, I am the Starbucks fan, right? I think that is what a company like Starbucks is doing. There have been some organizations out there that might do some kind of rewards. They might invite customers to, or they might invite people that contribute ideas to come to events, might give them VIP access to certain things. But I haven't heard off the top of my head any monetary or financial rewards that go into things like this. And oftentimes, I don't think they are necessary. But as far as going to competitors, that's where, if Starbucks wouldn't listen to the community, of course, they would go to the competitors. Starbucks doesn't want to do this, we'll go to Coffee Bean. But what's really great about this is a company like Starbucks does listen. And they will respond, and they'll say, you know what? This is a great idea. It's not the most popular one right now. We'll see if we can try to get to it in the future. They will have that interaction. They will have that dialogue with you so that you know that your idea is being heard. And I think that's really important. Yes? How do you blow up an org chart? I love that question. How do you blow up an org chart? So I have a separate, in the orange book, I have a model of 5 different types of organizational structures that we're starting to see. The hierarchy as we know it, I think, is definitely on its way out. But I also don't think that things like holacracy and flat structures make sense for larger organizations. They're not scalable, they're not practical. So I think what we're seeing in most organizations is what I like to call a flatter organization. Some structure, but opening up the lines of communication, going up and down and everywhere, anything goes anywhere. So how do you actually blow that up? Well, you have to have people at the top that believe in and support that. Because what I find is that as hard as employees try to change that, if you have executives at the top of the company that are willing to kill it, it's going to die. And when that dies, you just lose top talent, and the organization as a whole struggles. Thankfully, we're starting to see a lot of organizations that are starting to turn around and think about that differently. But I think it honestly starts with having that basic conversation, having that dialogue. I won't mention a name or company, but I had somebody very close to me that worked at a large organization, 130,000 people. And her boss would not show up for meetings, would take credit for her work. And I said, why don't you just go to your boss's boss? And she said, oh, I can't do that. There's just this bureaucracy here. I'm going to get in trouble if I do that. Now, in that type of environment, what do? I mean, as an employee, you don't want to be a part of that type of an organization, right? You want to leave. So the company slowly starts to lose talent. But you also have to have these executives that are higher up at the organization that realize that that is an important change required. I think there are a lot of great case studies. There are a lot of great examples that are out there. There's a lot of fantastic research that's out there. I think it's about getting that information in front of the right people. Yeah? Any other questions? Yes?
Sounds like some of the companies you work with, they have a higher-up champion.
Hire what?
Champion.
Oh, a hired champion?
Who has an ability to go on a peer-to-peer level with the heads
Yes.
of departments and say, here's an idea that impacts engineering, or here's an idea that impacts sales. Have you found that to be true, that they have a high-level person? Or?
Absolutely. Well, sometimes they're hired people. Sometimes they are not hired people. Sometimes these are people that go outside the scope of their regular full-time job to be champions within the organization around innovation. So, for example, one of the companies is Sanofi. Sanofi is a member of our community. The guy that runs their collaboration program is actually in charge of what they call unconventional innovation. He goes outside of his regular duties to help drive collaboration across the organization. But he was given support from his executive team, and they said, look, if it doesn't work, you're not going to get in trouble. We'll help you. We'll give you any kind of resources that you want. But just make sure that your regular day job doesn't suffer. And so he was given the opportunity to be a champion. There are several people like that at Sanofi. They're not paid to do that, but they do it because they want to drive change. In other organizations, there are some people that are hired as full-time change agents, as full-time champions, as full-time evangelists. I think it depends on the organization. I really think it depends on the organization.